Some of us grow up surrounded by mountains. Not the kind that you climb for sport, but the kind that raises you. Mountains that teach you how to carry weight, how to stay quiet, how to endure. And then one day, those mountains grow wings. You leave home, you wear a uniform, you step into an aircraft and fly toward danger instead of away from it. And you learn that courage isn't loud, it's heavy. Tonight we're talking about roots and wings, about Appalachia, about the Air Force, about what happens after uniform comes off. This is a Spirit Talk show, and this story is about learning to stand and learning to land. This is Doyle. You're listening to Spirit Talk Show, Bedtime Stories for Grown-ups. This is a warm, reflective storytelling space where real people unfold their lives with honesty and care, where we slow down, where we let the story breathe, where imagination and memory sit at the same table. Tonight I'm joined by Anthony Dyer, retired U.S. Air Force Special Missions aviator, Appalachian native, and author of Moonchild. Anthony's story stretches from the mountains of Appalachia to the high-risk missions in the skies. But this conversation isn't just about service. It's about identity. It's about carrying responsibility at 10,000 feet. It's about what happens when the mission ends and the silence begins. Anthony describes his journey as roots and wings. The mountains gave him roots. The Air Force gave him wings. But wings don't cancel weight. And coming home doesn't erase what you've carried. The boy in Appalachia started to fly. Tell me about that.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, Doyle. It's a pleasure to be here. Appreciate it. Yeah. So I grew up in a small town called Silva, North Carolina, and it was very small community. I like to joke around and tell people, back then I could probably throw a baseball across my hometown, man. And I basically I got to my senior year in high school, and my dad gave me the cliche talk of you're about to be a grown man. It's time to get a job, go to college, or get out. Excuse me. And so at that point, basically had no desire to go to college. Didn't have the grades to go to college. Really no motivation. Sort of going down the wrong path. And when he made that conversation with me, I talked to a Navy recruiter, and he was talking about being on the boat for 6 months. I was like, not for me. And I talked to an Army recruiter. Then at that point, I was going to talk to my dad sort of about the quality of life of the Air Force and, good chow halls, TDY, and golf clubs, all that good stuff. And at that point, I was like, I'm going to, do the Air Force. And there I was, July 18th of 2000 from Charlotte to San Antonio, Texas on my first fixed-wing flight ever to basic training.
Oh, must have been brutal to go somewhere where barbecue meant pork to somewhere where barbecue meant beef.
Wow.
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we, barbecue North Carolina has like a mustard, like a mustard base, so it's different. You know what I mean? But yeah, we had our share of pigs. But yeah, you're right about the beef versus pork.
So did I understand you correctly that you said your first flight ever was flying down to Texas on a fixed wing plane to go to the Air Force Academy or the Air Force boot camp?
Yeah, it was boot camp, and it was my first fixed wing flight ever. I had when I was younger, like third grade, a flight over the Smoky Mountains, and like one of those tourists, like helicopter type rides,
Yeah.
And I sort of knew at that point, even at that young age, that aviation would take a big part of my life, and at that point on, man, I just knew that I always wanted to, in some way, shape, or form, get in the air.
So when I'm reading about when we're researching you, everything seems to come up. The theme in reading about you is carrying things quietly. So let's talk about what did responsibility look like in your childhood, and where you were you somewhere when did you learn to carry things quietly the way it seems to be described in many places online?
Yeah, no problem. So my grandfather, he worked. He was a Scott Irish. Last name Haffey. There's a lot of Scott Irish present in the Appalachians and all that stuff. And he sort of taught me to to carry those things inside you, and basically to always persevere, always find a way to persevere, but to do it quietly. And he also had the sort of the the mentality of like speak soft but carry a big stick, so make your words count when you do have to use them, right? And he also taught me a lot about like if you fall down 7 times, get up 8. So it instilled in me at least the work ethic part of that, and then to basically your victories to be silent about them and let them speak for themselves type thing. And if you're struggling, I don't really agree with it now, but I would say like to sort of the bravado that comes with that, the manliness, whatever you want to call that, and to sort of keep it in and deal with it the best you can as a man.
So did you have a question?
No, I was going to say my grandfather was Scots Irish as well, and I'd be curious whether there's any similarity. And it's in our family legendarium. Our great grandfather at one point in time, going into a public bathroom, looked down, and in the toilet there was a quarter. He stared at it for a little while and couldn't bring himself to pick it up, so he reached into his pocket, took out another 3 quarters, dropped it in. And the family legend is he said, for 25 cents, no, but for $1, yes.
So he went in for the dollar is what you're saying. Okay. So, wow.
Yeah, that's that made me think about sort of what was taught to me about friendship too, about sort of that Appalachian. It has sort of its own code of omerta, whatever you want to call that, and basically like keep your circle small, right? And my grandfather definitely taught me about the importance of like for friends, right? I'd rather have 4 quarters over 100 pennies, and I actually taught my daughter that analogy for friendship, basically who to let in and stuff like that. So it's a good comparison there.
So I've been to the Appalachian. I spent a summer like living in the Appalachian Mountains, and there's something, and I've been to South Carolina too, and there's something about those mountains that they're not just mountains, right? There's something there. There's some energy there. And what do you think it is? Do you think it's just the people, or is there something like mystical there? I don't know if you kind of lean that way.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a spiritual side of Appalachia, and I talk about it even in the book, and nature. There's this place in the Blue Ridge Parkway you can go, and people pay a lot of money to see it, but the lightning bugs in the summer, they'll light up in synchrony, like they're communicating, and I always thought that was sort of spiritual in itself, and they call it God's country and all this stuff, and there's all kinds of folklore that like things like whistling at night. You don't whistle at night, right? Because you basically invite those spirits in and stuff like that. And I forgot how many people a year get basically taken off the Appalachian Trail, or they go missing or whatnot. So there's definitely some spookiness to that, but there's also a beautiful side to that spirituality as well. And I always felt closer to God growing up there. And just if I wanted to go fishing, for example, I'd walk half a mile down the road, and when you get away from that sort of, you miss that life. Just the being that close to nature and the outdoors and stuff like that.
And you live there now. And please excuse me, am I pronouncing it wrong? Am I saying the Appalachian Mountains, but you're saying something different? Is that just an accent? Is that an accent thing, or am I pronouncing it wrong?
Yeah. Honestly, it's probably my accent. I've heard it called Appalachian, Latin, Appalachia. But yeah, it's all the same to me. And but yeah, I live in eastern New Mexico now. I retired out of the Air Force here 1 December of 21. So I'm in the so-called land of enchantment, and just decided to stick around here. This is where my wife is from. She's from the Navajo Nation up the road there. So it's awesome. In its own way, sort of, it had its way of, always showing me sort of how like fragile hope can be. And, there's a lot of Appalachia that's like that as well,
Well, we want to, wow, it seems like being from the Appalachian and being a special missions aviator and then being involved in the Navajo Nation, it seems like you seem to follow these mystical, deep, like places that have a lot of connection with like the earth and our country. That's really cool. But let's talk about your special missions aviator. So that doesn't sound like a small role. So can we talk about that? What does the job demand? Like what does it demand from you emotionally as well as technically?
Yeah. So definitely emotionally, you have to be able to take some critical feedback, from the get-go. I got a couple fun experiences with my first flight ever, and I can talk about that later. But definitely, sometimes in that life, or a lot of times, you're going to see the worst thing that could, to happen to someone, right? And it's one of those jobs that you really never want to have to do, whether it was on the H-730 gunship, which I started out flying with, or especially the rescue helicopter. And what the Air Force did was in approximately 2013, what was then aero gunner career field, they combined that with the flight engineer career field as well as the loadmaster. So you had one person doing, all 3 of those different jobs, and that could be, weight and balance, told, which we call takeoff and landing data, aircraft systems, aerial gunnery, just all these different tasks. So a jack of all trades type mindset with that, and it's a perfect job for somebody who has, I guess, OCD, and you like to multitask and stuff like that, and definitely demands a lot of situational awareness, and I think a lot of that, part of that is knowing thyself, right? And when those emotions do hit, right, and the dust settles, and knowing when to take that tactical knee. And I definitely got to that point, towards the end of my career.
How many years service did you have?
I did 21.4 years.
Wow. So let's talk about your book. You wrote this book called Moonchild. Tell us about the story about where that came from and where the motivation and what made it need to come out of you.
Yeah. So my last year in the Air Force, I was getting a prolonged exposure therapy with a psychiatrist, and part of that process is like you start out writing your story out, and then you tell it. I remember the first time I told the psychiatrist, the USOCOM psychiatrist, like, I cried, she cried, and she would always say, like, you need to tell your story, and I said no 100 times, and sort of the quiet professional thing that we were sort of talking about earlier. And when I got out and I'm filling out my D-214 paperwork, and you're in this personnel-less type office, right? And you walk out that door, there's no door handle on the other side. So it was very symbolic to me, like this machine goes on, right? Like, you can walk out, but you can never really get back in. And I just remember thinking, like, all of that for this, and what I'm getting at is I'd lost my identity, my sense of purpose, my why. And, in the AC-130, the whole reason for the close air support is, for those super ninjas, like your Green Berets, your SEALs, your Rangers, etc. And, there's letters around that squadron where, like, there's a Ranger holding his baby girl, and he thanks the squadron and the gunship for their close air support. He got to go home and see his girl. Just that sense of relevance I knew was gone at that point. When I retired, and so I struggled with that a lot, and it's a common theme, the loss of identity. And once I got out and I started thinking about it, I was like, what, maybe I can pay it forward. Maybe if someone reads this book and they decide to get help, take that tactical knee, that's a blessing, that's a win at that point. And another reason I wrote it would be to show the rest of civilians, like, hey, this is what goes on when you're sleeping in some of these missions.
So this is a nonfiction book. It's about your experience in life, right? Did I get that correct?
Correct, yes.
Correct, yeah. So did you, I don't know, presumably you tell stuff in the story that were personal stories and events. So you decided, at what point did you decide, I'm going to make all this public?
So definitely, at that point, basically I was trying to replace drinking with writing, and I found the therapy part of that to be therapeutic. And what would happen was, every time I wanted to drink, that urge, if you ever had that level of alcoholism, like, it's a hard thing just to do, like, very cold turkey, right? And so what I would do is start writing things on a scratch sheet of paper. And I had a lot of the stories, especially from the missions, in my head, but, then I would throw this basically Charlotte's Web of emotional words on paper and try to make sense of 2 decades of war and all this. And then finally I got the stones to reach out on LinkedIn to a war reporter, a journalist named Holly McKay, and basically looked up for editors for, like, military type stories. And next thing you know, I had a conversation, and I would say from, pen in hand to book in hand would be about 7 months, which is relatively fast, but it is a really short read, about a 2-hour read.
Sorry, did you have a question?
So you were crew on a C-130 Spectre, is that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I did the AC-130 Spectre, the H model gunship, and then as well as the HH-60 Pave Hawk helicopter, and then I also flew in the AC-130 Whiskey model, which was the platform for the J, the Ghost Rider.
Wow, I know a pilot who was 25 years phantom pilot in the Air Force, and everybody I know who's in the military, they come out with a lot of weight. Everybody I know who's come out, and my own son is 19, and he's speaking to recruiters right now, and he wants to fly. And it's a hard road right now to get into that place to fly right now. So he is speaking to them. He's speaking to the Navy and the Air Force. So, talking about your story again, was there a chapter that was hard to write because it was a painful truth, or there was something that was painful to relive?
Yeah, 100%. So when I went to the helicopter side of things, the rotary wing on the Pave Hawk, I was involved in a CASEVAC mission in June 2018 in East Africa, and I tell people that day we saw the best side of that role of combat search and rescue, meaning we saved 5 guys, and we saw the worst side, meaning an American, an Eagle passed. So when he got back on the operating table when we got back. And, that it's definitely one of those lives where, like, it's not what you do that haunts you, it's what you don't do, and not having an American come back, that, I still deal with that to this day, and it's got my very darkest moments, and, I did my best to sort of paint that picture with words on the paper, but still, it's I understand now, especially these are jobs you never want to have to do, but at the same time, the aviator in me, the American in me wants to be the guy to go when somebody's number's called and their back's against the wall, that gunship's coming, as well as that rescue helicopter, so it was definitely hard to paint that picture with words for that.
Yeah. So you've spoken about that sort of unseen, quiet weight. What's something civilians don't understand about what service members carry home, or that you just find you can't even really talk to someone who hasn't served and been in that role?
Yeah, the most common thing that I could think of, and I love that question, is that people never seem to realize, well, at least a lot of the times I've seen, that we're all just very normal men and women, right, doing these very uncommon things, and it's not if, it's often when, where you have to call time out and get help for that, and I could imagine a firefighter, even a paramedic, like things like that. They see that every day. I couldn't imagine like going through that. But just that fact that we're just very normal men and women that had to do very uncommon things for freedom.
I think there's something in the military that people in the civilian world don't understand. I have a friend who was in the Navy, a nuclear technician, loved it, worked for it. But then one day he expressed I need to talk to someone, right? I'm having emotional concerns.
Yes.
And he was off his submarine. He was off, suddenly he was in an office job, and he ended up being 20% medically retired from so because there's this stigma, we say, please talk and get help, but then if you do, so sometimes it makes your life more complicated in the service. Yeah,
it's an excellent point. There's a thing in the military, like for a ground guy or girl, it'd be basically a do not arm from their commander, right? Because you're seeking mental health, and basically they, you can't have a weapon at that point. And flying, it's called duties not to include flying. It's called DNIF. And like nobody wants to be that man or woman where that comes for the commander, But at the same time, if you're not healthy, you can't do the mission, right? You'd be putting, your brothers and sisters in more danger at that point. So it's I will say though, 100%, it has gotten better, right? With the stigma, and like, I saw some high-ranking people that I served with get help, and to me that said a lot, and there's these things called Special Operations Forces Truce, right? And the first one is humans are more important than hardware. And now we're actually, putting our money where our mouth is with USOCOM, it seems like. So it's a good program called the POTUF, the Preservation of the Force and Family. There's all these resources now that maybe weren't there 20 years ago,
Wow. Does that sort of help with having this sort of idea of, you just tough it out and muscle through? It sounds like you're saying that that the culture's changed a bit more to be able to say, sometimes you just need to take a beat and get some help.
Oh yeah, and that's a lot of that. I remember the sort of Admiral McCraven, like, was it? I can't remember what year, is it 13 or 15? But like that's when the ops tempo slowed down in itself, And I think he realized that fact, and it filtered down, because we had what we call 1-to-1 dwell time. Like for a flyer, for example, it was like 90 days on, 90 days off, right? So that means half the year, every year, you're either at that point Afghanistan, or especially when the ISIS thing kicked off for that. And then now it's like, you may get like once a year type deployment. And so I think they realized that, hey, like, this 2 decades of war and all the wear and tear, not just the machinery, right, but the human, the spirit, the mind, everything that goes with that, needs to take that knee as well. And I feel like it's, the military in a whole is a lot better place than what it was, especially 20-something years ago.
So I know you've said that the mountains gave you roots and the Air Force gave you wings. So what did writing give you?
I would say writing gave me a way to express those wings. It's definitely good to know where you come from with the roots part of it, but what's more important is to know where you're going, right? And sort of, at the end of the story, I talk about there's this time capsule letter I wrote my senior year in high school, and it's one of those letters where like, hey, I suspect I'll be doing this in so many years. These are my fears. This is what I want, my dreams, right? And that letter is still at my mom's house. It's still locked up, and she asked me if I wanted to read it, and I was like, no, because She's like, why? I was like, because if I look back, I'm lost. It's going forward. Basically, what I'm trying to say is it's always important to just keep moving forward. And I would say writing, it gives me something to look forward to. It gives me something that I enjoy, and you find common themes with people in these uncommon jobs. And you'll realize you'll start getting texts and emails that are almost overwhelming from people who used to fly with saying, hey, I've struggled with the same thing, right? And I'm glad you finally got it out. And, gunships, we have a story, or veterans, every veteran has a story, so they get the courage to get those words on paper and get them out.
Yeah, and all the veterans I know are carrying much more weight than anybody can ever know, and it seems like there's a big price that we don't always see. So like Anthony, we do this thing on the show. It's a storytelling podcast, and we research you, and we look up everything we can find about you online, and we write a little tribute story. So if you'll indulge us for a few seconds, I don't know if you listen to any of our episodes, but we do this tribute story. So if you'll indulge us, we're going to have the deep voices of Howie here on my right is going to read your tribute story, and then we have some more questions and stuff. And then I'd asked you if you had some excerpts that you wanted to read from your piece. Had you brought something?
Yes, sir. I got a couple.
Okay, so let's see. Okay, this is your tribute story. It's not too long, so I'm sorry you have to endure compliments for 5 minutes. So.
Roots and wings.
That's all right. I appreciate it.
There was once a boy raised by mountains. Not the kind tourists visit, not the kind you photograph at sunset, but the kind that press into you quietly and teach you how to endure. The mountains did not speak loudly. They taught in seasons. In winter, they taught him stillness. In summer, they taught him sweat. In storms, they taught him that you do not argue with the wind, you brace. The boy learned early that strength was not something you declared, it was something you carried. He learned that family meant showing up, that work meant doing it even when no one was watching, that love sometimes looked like silence and grit and staying. And then one day, the mountains did something unexpected. They gave him wings, not feathers, metal, not wind under his arms, but turbines, weight, altitude, responsibility. He climbed into aircraft that did not drift with the sky but cut through it. He flew toward places most people would turn away from. He carried others in moments when gravity felt heavier than usual. Up there, above the earth that raised him, he learned something new. Courage is loud in movies, but in real life, it is methodical. It is trained, it is disciplined, it is heavy. And sometimes it follows you home. When the uniform came off, the sky did not disappear. It stayed inside him. In quiet rooms, in memory, in the space between who he had been and who he was becoming. The mountains had taught him to stand. The mountains had taught him how to stand. The sky had taught him how to endure. But neither had taught him how to land. Landing required something different. It required saying, I'm carrying more than I thought. It required letting someone else share the weight. It required trading altitude for honesty. And so he began to write. Not to escape the sky, but to translate it. Not to dramatize what he'd lived, but to place it carefully into words so others would know. You are not weak for feeling this. You are not broken for carrying this. You are not alone in this. The boy raised by mountains became a man who learned the sky. And then he did something even braver. He came back down. Roots still deep, wings still strong, but grounded enough to speak. And somewhere tonight, someone listening will feel less alone because of that.
Okay. So what do you think of that summing up of your story?
That was beautiful. Honestly, man, I got a teary-eye with that. I appreciate that. And that was beautiful words, so thank you for that.
So I will send you that story if you want. I mean, we seem to get pretty great reactions 100%. Most of the time when we read these stories. And, I mean, sometimes they're mixed. Sometimes people are like, meh, and sometimes people are teary-eyed. So that's what we're going for, I think. But, yeah, and I like how it's summed up. And it's kind of written in a poetic way, too. So I kind of enjoy that. So, Go ahead.
No, I was saying I especially love the part, where it talks about the wind and, it helps give you your wings. I'll even talk about this in a minute, but like a lot of people don't realize that, no matter what you're going through life, right? Like your troubles, these missions, everything could be going against you, right? Like the EPs, the malfunctions, the weather itself. And, Henry Ford said that, an aircraft takes off against the wind, not with it. So you need some of that drag for lift. And what I'm getting at is like a lot of times I've realized it's like life or God or wherever you believe it is going to put you in isolation before elevation, So I appreciate those words. That was amazing.
That's great. So I can't help thinking it seems like you had a very deep family connection and a community connection and a connection to the land. So when you got up and left like Appalachia and went, was it like, were you feeling elevated or were you feeling ruptured when you left to go to the Army? The Air Force.
I was definitely feeling elevated and excited, scared if I'm being honest, right? Like, I'd never been probably past, Myrtle Beach at that point in my life was the furthest outside of that small town in North Carolina I'd been. But yeah, it was definitely, I call it live a house money life. I realized that, life's about taking chances. I realized at a very young age that the moment we start breathing, you start dying, right? And I didn't want to get to my grave one day and ask those two dreadful words like, what if, So that was huge excitement with just leaving that place for the first time. But I'll always long to go back there, Yeah,
that's great. And do you have still family there, or is it just a small town you visit sometimes?
Yeah. So my mom and dad lived there. The first time I went back in a long time was July 5th of last year for my book signing in a small bookstore called City Lights Bookstore in Silva, and it was an awesome experience seeing people I haven't seen in 25 years or so.
That's great.
And a lot of them had joined the service, not even realize it, and so we got to share some stories, and it was an awesome experience.
Wow. So, hey, that's great. It's cool you got to go do it in your hometown, and that's fun. I am from a different part of the world too, and to go back, it is cool to connect with people. So, you have an excerpt or two you'd like to read to us tonight? Do you have? This would be a good time.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, this always gets a laugh. I talk about my first flight ever on a gunship.
Okay.
So I'll start here. So my first training flight was nothing short of a disaster. My instructor jokingly told me I was why they had to brief passengers on airplane seatbelts. I felt utterly lost and overwhelmed, as if I was barely keeping up with the pace. But looking back, that moment was a pivotal part of my growth. I've come to understand that training isn't just about mastering the mechanics. It's designed to simulate the stress and adrenaline of combat. It's about pushing your limits, getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, and learning to function under pressure. In those early moments, I felt like a fish out of water, but I quickly realized that this was a process. The intense moments of failure and frustration would be the stepping stones to success. Through this crucible, you learn resilience, adaptability, and the ability to stay calm when everything is chaotic around you. I've learned the real test wasn't about executing every maneuver perfectly, but maintaining focus when the stakes were high. Over time, those intense, nerve-wracking experiences became a natural part of the rhythm. The stress that once felt suffocating started sharpening my instincts, and I began to see those early struggles not as failures, but as invaluable lessons that would serve me when it mattered most. When I struggled during training, my instructor asked me, "What's the most powerful word in the world?" I was stumped. He said, "Perseverance," and asked me to reflect on its meaning before our next sortie.
And is that a story from your book? Is that in your book? Or is that just a personal story?
Yeah, definitely. It was my first flight on the AC-130. It went so bad. I tell people, my instructor said something to the effect like, "You're the reason you have to bring seatbelts on airliners," right? And we get to the end of this story. We get to the end of this sortie, right? And he sees me licking my wounds is what I'm getting at. And he asked me, he's like, "What's the most important word in the dictionary?" And I was like, "I don't even know where I'm at right now, man." Like, he's like, "Perseverance." He's basically, I want you to show up next flight ready to go and ready to fight, right? And since that moment forward, I realized it's you're going to fall down, and like my sort of grandfather sort of told me back in the day, you're going to fall down 7 times, but you got to get up 8, and that's flying.
You're also living in a world where you could be shot at, your life could be in danger, but the next minute you need to fly that plane out of there and to save people so people don't die. So even though there's a lot of stress and fear and anxiety, you still need to fly the plane, right? Somebody needs to.
Yeah, that's an awesome point. I'm glad you realized that, though. We have this thing in flying. It's called a EP mantra, and basically like a think about like a acronym for like staying safe, right? And I tell people aviate, navigate, communicate, and so every EP, right? So I use the matter principle. So maintain aircraft control, right? So you're okay. Take a second. You're still flying. You're still going forward, right? Analyze the situation, right? So okay, what do I really have? Let me see the bigger picture and take appropriate reaction and respond as accordingly. So you can take a lot from flying with those sort of acronyms, and you could apply them to life.
Yeah, and I think sometimes after you fly, when something goes wrong, the after action report, people are judging things you did, not in the moment, because you're in the moment with seconds to react. And it's like that person who landed the plane in the Hudson, right? Afterwards, they tried to make it his fault, but then he showed they showed that he could have avoided crashing. But that's if he had all the information we have now. In the moment, he had moments to react and to save people's lives.
Oh yeah, and I actually put that story in the book there, and I always ask people, because I do the flight simulators here at Cannon Air Force Base. I'm like I'll ask the guys, like, hey, do you remember who Sully's co-pilot was, right? And nobody hardly knows, but his name was Jeff Skiles, and there's these things in flying. It's called a boldface, right? And basically, there's these procedures where there's no time to get in a checklist or a technical order. You have to respond right then. And Jeff Skiles, like my understanding, he executed that boldface like 3 times to try to relight the engine. But teamwork with Sully, right? The aircraft commander, he saw the writing on the wall, which said, okay, we're going to ditch in the Hudson. And a lot of these situations, and you're right, there is no black and white. There's no right and wrong. There's either safe or unsafe, life or death.
Yeah. And you have to make that moment decision. So did you have another piece you wanted to read? You said you had a few.
Yeah, I got one here, and it's the last chapter of it's called Roots and Wings. When I was a senior in high school, our English class had us write a time capsule letter to ourselves during the last semester. This letter, which I still keep in my parents' house in North Carolina, was a snapshot of my hopes, dreams, and fears then. I often wonder how my life turned out compared to what I wrote in that letter. I wonder what 17-year-old me would think about the current day me. Would he be happy with how it turned out, or are some letters best left unread? I haven't been home in a long time at this point. Honestly, I'm not sure why. God may cut us all from the same cloth, but sometimes he weaves some of us into something different, something uncommon. If my life was ordinary and perfect, sunny and 75 every day, then did I even live? But that's the beauty of our journey. The scars and imperfections are not blemishes, they're badges of honor. They're marks of our resilience, the signs of our growth. They shape us, mold us, and show us how far we've come. Sometimes we land, only to take off again. I'm still a constant work in progress, and in life, just like aviation, sometimes comes the exam first, and then the lesson.
So you mentioned that letter, I think, earlier. You've never actually, did I hear you right, that you said you'd made a conscious choice not to go back and read what you wrote to yourself at 17?
Yeah. So I went home on the July 5th, and that's when my mom asked me about it. And that was the first time I'd been home in years at that point. July 5th of last year, and she asked me if I wanted to read it. And I was like, no. That's where I got into I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Now, have you considered, and maybe you did, write yourself another time capsule letter to put alongside that one for potentially someone looking at, or yourself looking at, 10, 20 years from now?
That's an awesome idea. I'll definitely entertain that, man. I never thought about that. That's a really good idea.
So I wanted to, and I don't mean to explore too much talking about this letter, and I don't want to pry too much, but why didn't you want to read it again? Was there something that you didn't want to relive, or was there anxiety around?
I think it's because I realized that I can't change the past, right? There's nothing that I can do to change the past. I can only change what I'm going to do next, right? It's the roots, right? It's important to know where you come from, right? Yeah. But it's really, to me, more important to know where you're going. Where am I going to end up?
Do you remember when you wrote that time capsule letter, had you decided yet whether you were going to join the service, or was that after you wrote that letter?
It was probably right before it. It was my senior year in high school in English. So what's half a school year? About 6 months. So yeah, it was probably right about that time. And I probably just wrote it just to get the class over with.
Right.
I can't remember what I put in there. God knows if it was even realistic. So.
Well, that's why you're saying that you don't know what's written in it. That's why I'm saying, but you hesitate reading again. I was trying to understand why, if there's something you didn't want to relive, or it's just that you weren't interested in reading it again.
Yeah, I think it's more of a it doesn't shape the outcome of my future. So it's they're baseless words at that point. If I think about it like that, And I could be wrong. Maybe I had some hidden gems in there that I wish I would have read a long time ago, but. I don't think that's the case.
Reading our 17-year-old self, it doesn't usually have gems. It has probably oh my gosh, reading the stuff that when you were 17. I wrote a sci-fi novel when I was 17, and it's pretty cringe. But okay, sorry, do you have a question?
Well, I think there are people who at 47 are a lot like what they were at 17.
Probably.
The people who they peaked in high school, and then there are people who are radically different and have very little in common with their 17-year-old self. So.
Yeah, but I can't imagine a person who grew up in the deep roots of Appalachia and then went and did something so tremendous, like flying these huge machines into battle and I don't think that's a person. That
in general, how much one would sort of relate to your 17-year-old self.
Yeah,
and how interesting that letter would be to read probably is tied a lot to whether you really see yourself in that person anymore, or that person in you.
Okay. So regarding that's cool. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. It was it's interesting. You mentioned that. I was on TikTok, and this guy. I hope I don't butcher this quote, but he's like, you don't have to impress anyone in life, not your spouse, not your kids, not your friends, not anybody. He's like, you just need to impress the 8-year-old you and the 80-year-old you. He's like, because that's cool. That's your two staples of sort of where you've been and where you're going. I see your point in that, and maybe I will read it one day, and I'll definitely, if I ever do, I'll definitely have to FaceTime you guys.
Okay, great. Well,
see what it says. So.
Have you back on to read about it. So let's talk about Moonchild a little bit more. So do you see yourself as a storyteller or a witness when you're writing Moonchild? When you wrote Moonchild?
It was definitely a witness, but you do need some storytelling, techniques, and, these words that I never thought I could even pronounce, and, definitely the editor helped me say the loud part out loud with a lot of that stuff, right, and help to really get to the root of what I'm really trying to say, but yeah, I would say it's more of a witness, but then the editing part is sort of how you get in the nitty-gritty of getting those words on there,
Yeah, I would guess that you could probably be mainly witness to other people who'd been through similar things, but when it comes to trying to translate that to civilians like myself, that you've got to clothe that in a context, because we won't have the context that those events happened in. So
yeah, and I think too with that, as admin as it sounds, right? Like I had a lot of acronyms in there in the beginning, and through the editing process and all that, right? Like to the military, yes, we know all these different acronyms for each branch and what they mean and stuff like that. But like civilians, they don't know, so I had to get those out of there, right? And use honestly just it's sort of like talking on the radio, just plain just common English or something like that,
Yeah. I mean, I'm not even sure where the word sortie comes from. I know that's what he refers to. I'm not even sure where that word comes from, because I know you said a sortie is a mission, right? And so where does that word come from?
Yeah, it's I just know it's the takeoff and landing of an aircraft flight. I'm not. It sounds like it could be Latin. I'm not exactly sure. I have to look that up. To be honest with you,
I gotta look that up. So, if you'll indulge us for one little minute more, we do have another tribute that we wrote for you in the form of a poem. So, you're going to read it this time?
You want me to take this one? All right.
You're going to take this one? Okay.
Roots and wings. He was raised by mountains that did not shout their lessons. Stone taught him patience. Wind taught him balance. Winter taught him how to survive without applause. He learned early that strength is quiet, that love looks like showing up, that you carry what must be carried. Then the mountains loosened their hold and handed him to the sky. Metal wings, rotors in flame, altitude measured in feet, and responsibility measured in lives. Up there, fear had no theatrics. It sharpened, it focused. It sat beside him in the cockpit, like an uninvited but necessary passenger. He flew toward the places others fled. He brought people home. But the sky leaves echoes. It lingers in the chest, in the silence after engines stop, in the long negotiation between memory and sleep. And so he did another brave thing. He landed. Not just the aircraft, himself. He spoke what many swallow. He wrote what many bury. He turned altitude into language so someone else could breathe. Roots still in the mountains, wings still in the wind. But now, grounded enough to say, you are not weak for carrying weight. You are not alone in the dark. And it is not shameful to ask for help landing.
Okay. What'd you think of that?
That's powerful. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we will, of course, send that to you. One thing, I know we've only spoken today, and like Anthony and I spoke to a few military people, but I think what this book is, you seem to be much more in touch with your feelings and what's important, and coming out of, you talked about coming out of it and maybe drinking too much when you come out of it, and you took the step that so many people don't take to say, I'm going to be better, and I'm going to, talk about the weight and talk about the fear and talk about the things and present it to the world. And I think that certainly is a healthy thing that I think has probably helped you and probably and hopefully helps anybody who reads your book. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Doyle. And it's a good point to talk about being better, right? I talk about in the book there. So my last year when I hit that point where I was drinking a pint a night to go to sleep in this vicious cycle, I'd lost a lung. I was angry at the world. I was angry at myself. I was angry at God, And I talked to a preacher man, and he's like, Anthony, he's like, life circumstances can make you bitter or better. In the end, the choice is yours. And really, at that point, that spiritual part of the healing was the cornerstone of it all, and just choosing better every day. And that could be being the best dad. I could be the best, husband. I could be the best wingman or friend to someone I could be. So I appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to get these words out there. Great.
I appreciate you coming on. Was there a moment in the middle of your service that you realized this is really changing me? This is making me a totally different person?
Yeah, I would say definitely a point where I got like almost robotic, like with the deployments and the, especially on the gunship. You're going to get a lot of, enemy killed in action. That is the job of that, right? But, by the time I realized, like, especially when it was one-on, one-off for deployment cycles, you're high-fiving somebody and you won't see them for the next 3 months, and then back to and from, back and forth. So this constant cycle of, like, I realized, like, all these wars and all these rumors of wars, like they talk about, like it definitely weighs on a man or woman,
So would the 8-year-old Appalachian boy, would he be proud of you? What would he think?
I would like to think so. I wish we did all have that magic ball we could look in and ask the 8-year-old boy that. But I would say that in the end, like I had a teacher tell me, when I was younger, you'll never make a living looking out a window. So just out of spite alone, as bad as that sounds, I would like to say that the 8-year-old boy would tell me that he would be proud.
Now you mentioned them combining the flight engineer, loadmaster, and aviation gunner together. Were you flight engineer? Were you pilot? Were you both? In those 20 years, what did your career cover in terms of your, what role you filled?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I didn't start flying until my 10-year point. So the last 11 and a half years, I started flying. So my first 5 years, this is even like pre-9/11 when I joined the Air Force, right? So it was like a weapons loader on the F-15, the Strike Eagle on the F-16s. And I did that 5 years, and then I decided to be an Air Force firefighter for 5 years. And that's the guys you see at the airports. They run around, they look like baked potato suits, like the aluminum foil looking type fire suits. So I did that, and then I get to a point where I was actually home on leave at a pizza joint, and I'm with some friends, and I look out in my little town there, and the same street that separated the two sides of town my whole life, and I look out and see the same cracks, and that's when I realized, like man, I don't want to leave cracks, I want to leave craters. Like, I want to get in this fight. And I went back to the fire station, and I read a book called Chosen Soldier by Dick House, and in the beginning of that book, it has the Isaiah 6:8, the send me verse from the Bible, and that's a very special operations centric verse, and excuse me. And at that point, I realized, that I want to be on the pointiest edge of that spear, and that's what decided to make a difference and get in the fight.
Okay. I'm glad that there's people like you who step up, and it gives you the opportunity, and our country gives you the opportunity to step up, and you get to, and you get to write this book that we all get to share. But Anthony, before we close, if someone is listening tonight and is struggling in silence, what do you want them to hear?
I would definitely say that, I talk about, touching the face of God in the book, and to me what that means is on those moments, the worst day of your life, right? Everything's against you, no matter what it is. That's the day that your brothers and sisters, your family, everyone that depends on your country needs you to be your very best. And part of being your very best is to realizing, hey, it's okay to get help. Like I said, we're all very normal men and women doing a very uncommon thing. And that, remember, like Henry Ford said, that, an aircraft takes off against the wind, not with it. So.
Oh, yeah. Did you have something before we?
No,
Okay, well, let me let me just close here. I know that some people fly missions, some people write books, and some people turn their lived experience into a bridge so others don't feel alone. So tonight, this is what we spoke about. Anthony, thank you so much for bringing both your roots and your wings into this space, and we're honored that you landed here. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. It was a pleasure to be here with you guys. Thank you.
Okay, well, have a great night. Say good night, Howie.
Good night.
Good night. Say good night, Russ.
Good night.
Hey, good night, guys. Appreciate you having me. Honestly, thank you.
Pleasure meeting you.
Yeah. So I paused the
Pleasure meeting you guys.
So I paused the recording just so I can speak to you about
Okay.
the recording and stuff, because you probably figured out I was recording from the first moment we spoke, because I kind of like to get that real conversation at the beginning, right? Sorry, I haven't.
So Anthony, is your book already out? Is it coming out?
Yeah, so it came out April 7th on my birthday of 2025. So it's approaching the year mark here soon. So
nice.
And you can find it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, and it's called Moonchild, The Roots and Wings of a U.S. Air Force Combat Special Missions Aviator.
And do you have a website?
Yeah, so the website would be Trait Marker Media. My publisher, Robbie Grayson, has a link to it there, and basically you go down to whatever country you're in, you click the flag, and it'll take you to the Amazon link. And I have an Instagram page called all lowercase Marco_Brolo21.
So if it's been almost a year, are you working on another book?
We're doing the sequel.
Yeah, and this will be the first time I've actually talked about this. I was working on another book, but I'm thinking about re-releasing this one and adding more to it, and
okay.
Sort of the common theme was if people want more, so I'm definitely try to get it up to 60,000 words and do a revision, or what's it called, a second edition, something like that.
That's great. Well, get Anthony Dyer. Am I saying your name right? Yeah, Anthony Dyer's
yes,
book,
sir, that's correct.
Moonchild available on Amazon, presumably too, and on your website. And and thank you for letting us get a glimpse into that world that many of us will probably never see. And thank you for coming on. Okay.
Thank you. It was an honor. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for spending time with us. Now go make a story worth telling.